Hey guys, so today I'm going to be showing you how I make my jalapeno cheddar sourdough bread. It was actually inspired by one of my followers who has purchased sourdough starter from me numerous amounts of times. The first one she sent to heaven. But she purchased again, and I saw the breads that she bakes, and one of her favorites is to make jalapeno cheddar. So I said, you know what, let me give it a try, and I have fallen in love with it, so has my family. So yeah, let's get started. So this is my starter. His name is Cillian. You could name your starter if you have one. Mine's name is Cillian. He is a good boy. He's about 3 years old and he gets the job done. So I fed him the day before I planned on baking. I fed him around 11:30 at night, and I bake the next day, or start my dough the next day around 10 o'clock a.m. Okay, so to start the recipe, I use 1 1/3 cups of warm water. And then for starter, I'm using 3/4 cups of starter. I do not use any scales in any of my recipes, or whenever I make bread, I don't use scales. It's just not my thing, and it's annoying. That's my personal opinion. I don't want sourdough to be complicated to you, and I feel like sometimes when people see the scale and they see grams and all of that, it kind of deters them from wanting to try making their own sourdough bread. So I try my best to kind of keep my recipes simple and straight to the point. And just for the record, I did grow up using grams in my birth country. All right, I live in the US now, so just wanted to let you know that, okay? All right, so once we got our starter in there, and again, the starter was fed the night before around 11:30 p.m., and I'm baking the next day around 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m., okay? That's the time frame of when I fed and when I start making my loaf. All right, so now I'm gonna add in 1 tablespoon of honey, and I'm also going to add in 1 tablespoon of sugar. If you can't consume or don't want to consume this much sugar, you can definitely do half of the amount of sugar and half of the amount of honey. But I highly suggest you follow the recipe and see for yourself how it tastes, okay? Once I have everything in the bowl, my water, my starter, my sugar, and my honey, I'm going to go ahead and give this a good mix, making sure everything, kind of breaks apart, because sometimes the starter is really thick. So you want to mix it in and get it to be kind of like liquidy, break it up in there, mix it in with the honey, get it all nice and mixed together before you add your flour. Once I got that done, I'm going to add in 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Okay, I'm using bleached flour. If anybody's wondering, you can use unbleached flour. I'm not sure how this will do with whole wheat flour, so I can't give you an answer on that because I've never made this with whole wheat flour. But I'm using 3.5 cups of all-purpose bleached flour, and like I said, you can use unbleached flour. I'm not sure about whole wheat. All right, once I have my flour in my mixture, I'm gonna give this a good mix, bringing everything together, okay? It doesn't have to form a dough right away. You just kind of want it to be like a shaggy looking dough. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're gonna let this rest again for another 20 to 30 minutes. That depends on how warm your house is. And for anyone wondering, my house right now is at 71 degrees. That's the temperature, okay? Depending on the temperature in your house, your bread might proof really fast or take really long, okay? So if your house is on the colder side, say about 65, 68 degrees, it may take a little longer for your bread to proof. Most people will proof their bread overnight if their house is at around this temperature, or let it proof slowly in the fridge if their house is at this temperature. But because mine is around 70, 71-ish, sometimes 72, I could let my dough proof on the countertop. So this is how your dough should look, and you're just going to cover it and just leave it alone for about 20 to 30 minutes, okay? After the 20 to 30 minutes, now we can add our salt, and I'm adding in 1.5 teaspoon of salt, and we're going to use our spatula first to combine this before getting our fingers dirty. Make sure if you have any jewelry on to take it off. I do eventually take my rings off because it gets all gunked up with flour. And make sure your hands are freshly washed, and then you can get in there and start start kneading your dough. But first, we're going to use the spatula to get most of the super wet parts of the dough combined so our fingers don't end up like a sticky lobster claw type of a mess, okay? All right, so after we've combined as much as we could with the spatula, I use a very firm spatula. I'm going to use my hands to knead my dough. I'm going to do a lot of kneading. I want to say it takes about 5 to 7 minutes worth of kneading, and while I knead, I also do my stretch and pulls. I do not do stretch and pulls every 2 to 3 hours or every half hour. I don't do any of that. I do most of my kneading and my stretching when I form my dough to rise. Okay, so as you guys could see, it's starting to become stretchy, and that's pretty much what we want. All right, so to get that extra dough off the corner, I'm going to use a scraper. You can get this in Walmart, or you can use a spatula or a spoon and just get this off the sides. And this, you can use this also to help combine your dough if you don't want to get your hands too dirty. It works really well, but I like the combination of the spatula and then finishing off with my hands. So a really good tip when you're doing your dough and it's super sticky is to keep your fingers wet. This is going to keep the dough from sticking to your fingers. I know it sounds weird, but it works, okay? And you're going to just keep your fingers wet, get a little bowl of water, warm water, and as you're kneading and pulling and tucking in the dough and creating, gluten and structure and texture in the dough, you're going to keep your fingers wet and keep them from getting, clumped up with dough. As you guys can see, I'm pulling and tucking in, pulling and tucking in, pulling and tucking in. And this is going to help get that gluten forming, get it going in the dough and get the structure going. I really never do pulls and stretches every hour, 2 hours, whatever it is that other people do. I try to make my sourdough making life super simple, okay? And I would like to teach you guys the way I do it. I know there's like a whole group of people out there that follow a list of rules and regulations, and I don't. I do my own thing, and I get wonderful results doing what I do. So I do a lot of my stretching and pulling and kneading in the beginning of when I'm forming my dough ball, and then I just let it rest. Okay, I let it rise, do its thing, let it ferment, and then I form my loaf. Okay. As you guys can see, it's starting to form some structure. The dough, it has more of an elastic feel to it. Okay, and I'm doing just the same tucking in, tucking in, tucking in. And then once I got my dough ball to where I'm happy with it, and like I said, 5 to 7 minutes of this, okay? So I let this bulk ferment for about 5 hours on my dining room table. This is closer to where my fireplace is, so the temperature in there is 72 degrees. So keep it covered so that it doesn't dry out. And you're going to let this bulk ferment for 5 hours, okay? All right, so after 5 hours, I'm going to flour my workspace with some all-purpose flour. Get it good and floured. Some people don't use flour, that's fine. I use flour. I like using flour. It's my preference, okay? This is what our dough looks like 5 hours after we formed that dough ball 5 hours ago, okay? So I'm just gonna let this fall out of the bowl. It's a tiny bit over fermented to some people, but makes an incredible, beautiful loaf of bread regardless, okay? Don't leave behind any dough in your bowl. Definitely scrape it out, take it out with a spatula or with your scraper and add it to the dough that's on your cutting board or working surface, okay? So we don't waste any of that. And I'm going to use the scraper to help bring this dough together. You can use the water if you like. It's completely up to you, whichever makes you feel more comfortable. Like I said, I don't want this to be complicated to you. I don't want you to be intimidated by making sourdough bread. It is actually a pretty simple, straightforward procedure and does not need to be made out to be some sort of complicated thing, okay? All right, so once we have our dough you know, together. I'm going to add a tiny bit more flour to my cutting board area. This is just to keep it from sticking onto my board because it is a pretty wet, sticky dough, okay? And then I'm going to stretch it out like this. We're making like a rectangular shape. Doesn't have to be a circle. We're going more for a rectangular shape so we can add in our inclusions, which I'm using jalapenos and cheddar cheese. So I take one jalapeno, removing the seeds. If you like your bread spicy, you can definitely leave the seeds, but I removed all the seeds and spreading it out as evenly as I can on the surface of the dough. And then I grated on fresh extra sharp cheddar cheese onto the dough. All right, you can use any type of cheese you like. I like extra sharp cheddar cheese, and I'm just grating this on like this. You can add more cheese if you want to. That's completely up to you. Okay, it's going to be really good, super cheesy bread. All right, so now that we have that in, we're going to fold it over and bring the other side over. And you want to do this, you know, it doesn't stick to your fingers. You want to move a little quick and fold it over like that. All right, and then we're going to add the rest of our jalapenos on that part. And then we're going to grate on more cheese on that part. All right, and then once we're done grating our cheese, we're going to form our loaf. And we're doing a circular loaf, and I'm using an 8-inch pan today. I don't use a fancy Dutch oven, even though I have some, but I prefer to bake my breads in baking pans, okay? So once we roll our dough over, we're gonna press the sides together like you saw how I did and close the seams on the side, and that is our loaf. We're doing a 8-inch round cake pan. I'm using a air fryer parchment paper liner for my loaf today. I usually just use pre-cut parchment paper, but I saw these in Dollar Tree, wanted to try them. They look super convenient, and they really are. All right, so I put my loaf in there, and then I'm going to cover it with another 8-inch pan. Make sure the other pan is the same size as the pan that you're putting your bread in, but must be deeper or taller to give the bread room to expand upwards, okay? I'm going to set this aside and let it rest for another 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, once this has rested, I'm gonna go in and score my bread. I usually go about an inch deep, okay, or 1.25 inches deep. The reason why we score the bread is to let it be able to expand, because there's going to be a lot of air bubble and the bread is going to triple in size. This dough ball is going to triple in size, okay? This allows for the bread to expand. You don't have to do it. It will still make a beautiful loaf. It's just gonna find its own spot where it wants to burst out of, okay? So I like to make my scores myself because this is how I want it to expand. All right, so I'm gonna add some really cute slices of jalapeno on top and some more cheddar cheese on top of that. And now we just wait for the oven to preheat. I actually use this time for the oven to preheat to let it rise just a tiny bit more.
This. Oh, I like cheese.
You like cheese? Just a little bit, baby. I need it for my bread. You know the babies have to have a piece of cheese. All right, so now that my cheese is in the places where I want it to be, okay, this is how she looks. Isn't she pretty? Isn't she pretty? And we're gonna wait now until the oven preheats. Okay, and I'm just gonna keep her covered until the oven is ready. So 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is how she looks after waiting what felt like 10 minutes, but I'm pretty sure it's less than that. All right, and we're gonna add her in the oven again at 425 degrees for 35 minutes. And we're also adding in a pot of cold water. Okay, the reason why we're adding water is to create steam in the oven. After 35 minutes, this is what we will have. All right, so this bakes for 35 minutes covered. Okay, you guys, after the 35 minutes, you're gonna remove the cover, and then it will bake for another 10 minutes uncovered. Make sure that pot that's in the oven still has water in it. If the water has disappeared, make sure you add some more. Please be careful when doing this. All right, so this is what she looks like after an additional 10 minutes being baked uncovered. covered, you guys. Look at that. Beautiful, isn't it? So she's not too dark, not too light, just right. The coloring on the bread, for me, I like how it looks. I could still see the cheddar, and I could still see the jalapenos. To know when your bread is right, she needs to have a internal temp of at or over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when you know the bread is done, it's ready. If it's under 200 degrees, put her back in the oven covered for an extra 5 to 10 minutes, okay? But make sure it's at 200 degrees and up, and she's done. All right? If you don't, it will be gummy. It will not be good. Trust me, okay? So make sure 200 degrees and up. And I know it's tempting to cut into this right away. And you can if you want. It's your bread. Do what you want. But if you want to get some really nice, perfect slices, you want to kind of let this cool down, okay? So I'm going to take this out of the cake pan. I kind of wish I had used the 9-inch pan, but it's okay because the bread is a bit taller, which I like. I preferred my breads to be a little bit taller instead of just flat out, like flattened out. So I like them to be taller, higher up. All right, so that liner did what it did. I can actually reuse that liner a few more times. This is the coloring on the bottom. Looks really good. And the coloring on the top. And I'm just going to leave this on the cooling rack to cool down. And I'm going to cover this with some bread bags, actually. This way it cools down without the air getting to it and making it hard, okay? So after a few hours of it cooling down, actually not a few hours, let's say about 2 hours of it cooling down, my kids were very impatient and wanted a slice. So I cut her open to see the crumb, which is everybody's favorite part of sourdough baking. It's the crumb, where people judge you based on your crumb. The crumb is basically the amount of holes, the way the holes are kind of situated. So that's the crumb, okay? She looks beautiful to me. If I were my own judge, I would give me 5 stars. All right, but you could see the jalapeno, you can see the cheddar cheese swirled in there. It looks absolutely beautiful. I think this could be in a magazine. I'm just saying. All right, but yeah, I hope you guys like how this looks. I hope you like how it turned out. I hope you try it for yourself, and I hope you like it. And thanks again to my follower for inspiring me for using the jalapeno and cheddar cheese inclusion in my sourdough recipe. All right, this is the sourdough recipe I use for all my breads, by the way. Okay, so I'm gonna slice a little slicey here for you guys to see, and then I'm off to bake yet another thing. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos. Bye, guys.